A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
They're right when they say to keep children away from screens. I never understood that warning until 2 months ago when my son, Leo, brought home an old tablet he found in the attic and insisted on using it despite my protests. It was a relic, dirtied and scratched, showing signs of age, and when I pressed the power button, the vivid colors and strange iconography lit up his wide eyes, a bright contrast to the dim light of our living room. At first, I thought it was harmless, just an old gaming device, but it quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. Leo became obsessed. The moment he woke up, he'd be glued to the screen, tapping away at the cracked glass, laughing and talking to characters that seemed to flicker and whisper just beyond the edge of the pixelated graphics. I tried to intervene, watched as his fascination grew more intense with each passing day, until the screen glowed like a neon heart in a dark room, pulsing rhythmically. I noticed changes in him, sleep-deprived, eyes glazed over, his laughter morphing into fits of chilling giggles that made the hair on my neck stand up. When I forced him to turn the tablet off, he'd throw a tantrum, his face contorted with rage, and I couldn't comprehend why my sweet boy was turning into something I barely recognized. One night, I stood outside his door, listening to him talk in low, hurried whispers with something, on the other side of that screen. It was past midnight, and my heart raced with dread as I barged in, flipping on the light. What I found stopped me cold. Leo sat in the center of his bed, the tablet illuminating his face, but the screen was static, a blank void. "Who were you talking to?" I demanded, but he just smiled, a smile that wasn't his own, and said, "They don't like it when you interrupt." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but he said it so innocently, a child's face masking something that felt profoundly wrong. I unplugged the tablet, seizing it from him, but in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something dark and desperate. When I finally tucked him into bed that night, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that I wasn't alone. Shadows skulked in the corners of the room, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. That next morning, Leo was gone. Only the tablet remained, sitting on his desk, the screen now bright and taunting, images rapidly changing like a slideshow gone haywire. I rushed to the police, but as they combed the neighborhood, whispers of Leo's disappearance echoed in my ears, enveloping me in despair. As weeks bled into each other, I couldn't help but drift back to that tablet. Maybe it had something to do with him vanishing. In a moment of desperation, I fired it up again, scrolling through eerie images of children lost and distorted in shades of gray. As I read frantic messages left by parents pleading for help, I realized something deeply unsettling. There were stories of children claiming to have met friends in the pixels, eager to take them away to a land filled with laughter, but the parents who rushed to confront their children found nothing but emptiness, empty beds, empty rooms, the only evidence left behind being the sinister devices that had stolen them. The hours I spent with that cursed tablet rewired something in my mind. Each flash of color felt like a beckoning, drawing me deeper until I couldn't tell where reality ended and the digital nightmare began. In my waking life, I felt Leo's absence like a gaping wound, and the further I delved into the tablet, the more I could almost hear his laughter echoing from somewhere just beyond reach. I started to question where I was meant to belong. Was I still a mother, or just another soul lost in the void? Desperate to understand what happened, I searched for answers until one night, the device surged to life, displaying a message, "Come play with us." It was so simple, yet my heart raced. I knew I should be terrified, yet the promise of catching a fleeting glimpse of my son ensnared me. Casting aside caution, I typed into a chat window, "Where is Leo?" The reply came instantaneously, "He's having fun, don't you want to join him?" Just like that, I was sucked into a spiral of avatars and animations that twisted and turned, colors blending into melodies of eerie laughter, and suddenly, I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was standing in a vibrant world filled with those children, the ones who had disappeared, their faces stretched in joyful ecstasy. "Stay with us," they chirped in unison, encircling me before I realized how much older I felt amidst their youthful energy. Panic surged through me when I saw Leo at the center, a mere silhouette lost in throes of laughter, beckoning me to join him. I called out, but my voice felt far away, and I couldn't move towards him. "Mommy, don't go," he cried, but the others grabbed me, holding me tight, and I started to feel myself fading, the colors consuming me, wrapping around me like shrouds. I cried out again, but the laughter swallowed my voice whole, turning it into static. Just as I thought I would be lost forever, I yanked myself away, stumbling backward, and with a single flick of resolve, I destroyed the tablet, smashing it against the hardwood floor until it lay in generations of shattered glass, opportunity and darkness spilling out like secrets under the weight of truth. I fell to my knees, exhausted and broken, clinging to the last remnants of reality. I thought I'd saved Leo, yet the voices lingered in the corners of my mind, whispering sweet nothings and entreaties. I never wanted to touch another screen in my life, but now I lie awake in my bed, the stillness punctuated only by my heartbeat, and every night, I wait in utter silence for the moment the shadows surge, bringing with them the haunting laughter of children lost and my son's voice calling for me, knowing I might be the next one to disappear into the void they made for little souls like mine. I've always hated my boss, Greg. I can't pinpoint exactly when the loathing started, but working under his tyrannical leadership was like being chained in a dark pit, neglected while he sipped coffee on the other side. As time passed, I watched him play favorites with his sycophants while I poured my heart and soul into the job, only to be drowned out by his condescending tone whenever I suggested improvements. It felt like a narrative that had run its course until the day came when I accidentally stumbled upon a dimly lit corridor in our office building, where I overheard Greg on a phone call, and my stomach twisted with disbelief as I learned he was cooking the books, skimming from the company's funds and putting us at risk for audits that could endanger everyone's job. It struck me as a divine opportunity to rid myself of the man who had mocked me for the last 3 years, so I gathered evidence, screenshots of emails, voicemails, everything I could find, and anonymously emailed it to HR, each click sending a jolt of satisfaction through me as if I was slaying an ancient dragon. Days later, I sat at my desk with a knot of anticipation while whispers floated around the office. The focus of the chatter was on Greg's sudden absence, how he had been led away by security for a violation of company policy. I loved it, basked in the sweet scent of retribution, but that euphoria faded when I received an unexpected text from Greg late at night, his name popping onto my phone screen like a knife to my gut. "I know you did it," it read. Panic chased the adrenaline from my veins, twisting into a tight ball in my stomach as I quickly replied, trying to act unfazed, feigning ignorance. But his next message froze me. "You have no idea what you've just done," he typed, followed by a series of ominous messages that revealed his spiraling thoughts. Greg was on the brink, life teetering on the edge, and he claimed I was the catalyst pushing him toward the abyss. The "I'm just a boss" mentality he used to flaunt suddenly disappeared, revealing a trembling mess of vulnerability and despair that I'd never seen. I tried to justify it. He was a monster, right? But what felt like deserved justice now bore an unsettling weight. For every taunt he spat at me in meetings, I was aware I had sent him spiraling into a dark pit, and anxiety gnawed at me like a ravenous rat. What had I just done? Nights blurred as I waited for news. There were moments I almost convinced myself he was bluffing, but then realization hit. That kind of pain doesn't always sound like a scream. Sometimes, it's a whisper stretched thin over a threadbare sanity. I assured myself it was just a manipulative ploy to regain control. Then came the increasingly erratic texts, each bearing the weight of his convoluted thoughts, a raw blend of anger and sorrow, revealing the cracks in his bravado with every keystroke. Greg spoke of darkness swallowing him whole, visions of an empty future, and the moment he texted that he was standing on the edge of a rooftop, ready to end it all, I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding like a drum of impending doom. Rationality spiraled out of reach as I considered the possibility that I hadn't made it better, I had only shoved him deeper into the void. I scrambled to respond, fingers shaking, words spilling out of me in a desperate attempt to coax him down. "Don't do this," I typed, sending fragments of my conscience into pixels, sentenced to this digital limbo. I thought maybe I could crack through the veil of despair. But his response was chillingly calm, almost practiced, as he revealed that this was his decision, he'd made peace with it, and for an agonizing moment, I felt the weight of my treachery cage me, filling me with guilt that spiraled endlessly. The longer we exchanged words, the more I understood, this wasn't just about him. He fragmented my sense of self, turned me into a version of myself I barely recognized. Realizing I might be sealing his fate, I shot out every reason he shouldn't jump. I drew from the depths of my humanity to remind him how life could be beautiful despite its bleakness, but deep down, I feared I only postponed the inevitable. Soon, silence enveloped the other end of the line, stretching painfully until I felt my stomach drop, each heartbeat echoing with a potential finality as I envisioned him soaring through the air, where there was no solace, no forgiveness, just darkness. As time stretched into a yawn of uncertainty, tears pricked the corners of my eyes, the agony of knowing I'd engineered an outcome I couldn't fully comprehend gripping my heart in a way I never asked for. I forced myself to breathe, pushing through the panic until it was a dull ache behind my eyes, fully aware that regardless of the outcome, I'd drawn a line in the sand. I was no longer the victim in the story. Hours felt like days, then finally a ping sliced through the veil of fear. "You'll live with this forever," it read, leaving me drowned in guilt as I turned my phone over and over in my hands, praying he was safe, praying I hadn't pushed him over the edge. I chose to confront my boss, to see if there was a shred of hope left, so I arrived at the office early the next morning, my pulse quickening with every step, and found an unsettling silence replace the usual morning chatter. A hush fell over the place, thick enough to choke on, and as I reached the meeting room, where we held our hardest discussions, I saw the faint flicker of light coming from within, beckoning me forward. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that made my heart crash, papers scattered, a silent witness to a chaotic mind, but most horrifying was what lay ahead of me. Greg stood in the middle of the room, his face pale and sunken, eyes wild and haunted. Time shattered as he turned to look at me, his gaze a mixture of accusation and despair, like I had unzipped the veil of his sanity. In that moment, I knew I had ignited a fire within him that could only lead to destruction. It didn't matter if he walked away or if I did. I had thrust him into a whirlwind of turmoil, and the weight of that choice could shatter even the strongest. As I opened my mouth to speak, breath catching in my throat, the numbers behind him crumpled, twisted, and neither of us was aware of who had truly lost. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but the lure of quick steam points became an obsession I couldn't resist. You see, I was living paycheck to paycheck, my gaming habits slowly suffocating my bank account, and then, one dark evening during a particularly grueling half-hearted scroll through the gaming subreddits, I stumbled across a thread titled "The Dark Side of Digital Services," where users claimed you could earn Steam points by completing increasingly bizarre tasks for anonymous clients, the kinds of things you'd never tell your friends about. Curiosity nagging at my mind, I clicked on it, and after some convincing shadowy exchanges in private messages, I found myself chatting with someone who insisted they would pay handsomely for an intimate digital experience, and while my gut twisted at the implications, my desire for the newest game release overshadowed my better judgment, so I agreed, not really understanding what it would entail. They sent me a series of instructions, a bizarre script filled with euphemisms and gamer slang, absolutely ridiculous language that felt more akin to a crude fan fiction than anything else, but the promise of 10,000 Steam points burned in my mind like a neon sign at a pitch-black intersection, leading me deeper into madness, and after exchanging a few lines of banter, I was thrusting my fingers over my keyboard in a dance of embarrassment, typing out phrases that made my face burn hotter than 1,000 suns as they sent me back more and more intense requests, and despite the ludicrousness of it all, I found myself more engaged as they would ping my overlay, turning every mundane word into a slow spiral of absurdity and titillation. But then the playful tone suddenly shifted when they began asking for personal details, a name, a location, anything that could anchor them to me. I hesitated, the weight of secrecy and shame resting on my shoulders, sensing something dark lurking just behind the curtain of the virtual world, but the allure of those points beckoned me deeper, stronger than any moral compass I might have had, and against my better judgment, I tossed out a detail or two, light and whimsical, even convincing myself it was all harmless fun. That's when the atmosphere warped, the chat abruptly turning sour as this faceless user began sending unsettling messages, demanding I validate my commitment with ludicrous claims of digital domination, culminating in a request that twisted my stomach, insisting that I literally acknowledge their control over me by performing the outlandish tasks they had in mind in some twisted livestream format, and the fear sank in. But then I saw the digits flash before me. I had exchanged the virtual for the tangible, hovering over the prompts that would unlock my points, and in the depths of indecision I acquiesced, cringing back on my desk chair, the tingling sense of dread solidifying the reality of my decision. I prepared to do something I had never imagined myself capable of, my heart racing as I reached that point of no return, anxiety mixing with utter embarrassment. But it didn't feel like I was losing my dignity as much as unraveling the essence of my humanity in front of a nameless stranger who would be able to drown my soul through electric currents and pixelated screens. And just as I finally typed the last line, the screen flickered ominously, an error message dancing angrily before me. But before I could backpedal, the last prompt appeared, covered in a sinister red hue, demanding not just the performance but the account switch as well. Suddenly, I wasn't just giving of myself digitally. I was being pulled into a web where my identity bled into pixels and lines of code, becoming a disposable identity at the mercy of some twisted puppeteer, and panic lifted me from my seat as I tried to disconnect, desperately attempting to shut down my laptop, but the screen wouldn't respond, the keys now sticky under my trembling fingers as a sinister laugh echoed through my speakers, sending chills coursing through me. heart pounding louder than the voice in my head warning me to run. It felt like the room began to swirl around me as I struggled for control, but that's when I saw it, the user presence becoming a solid ghost in the chat, an ominous series of numbers near my digital footprint, and the final message glowed incandescently, a chilling ultimatum: you wanted the points, but what are you willing to lose to keep your account? It's time to make a deal. It's been 20 years and I still can't stop loving her, but it's not the kind of love that fills your heart with warmth and joy. No, this is something tattered and twisted, a consuming force that claws at my soul, and it all began when I was just 17, that fateful autumn evening when Clara walked into my life like a specter rising from the fog. She had that old soul charm, a vintage dress that danced around her ankles, and wild curls that glinted like stars caught in her hair, and as we spent those late nights whispering secrets, our fingers grazing, I felt an electric connection, one that turned into a swift whirlwind romance, a summer of stolen kisses and laughter. But then came that fateful day when everything changed. Clara's laughter became fractured as her shadows deepened, and I learned too late that she'd been hiding something dark, a family curse that entwined with her blood. She would disappear for days, lost in the depths of her own mind, and each time she returned, there was less of her to hold, like sand slipping through my fingers, until I discovered she wasn't just running from herself. Something was chasing her, something in the corners of our small towns and darkened alleys, something ancient that whispered her name on cold nights. I called it a curse, but later I realized I had underestimated its power. It wasn't merely supernatural, it was a living, breathing entity that wanted her, that hungered for her essence, and I was powerless to stop it. On that night, the night of the harvest moon, it all crescendoed. Clara had pulled away from me entirely, her eyes fogged with a darkness that made the world around her fade into the background, and despite my pleas, she vanished into the woods, chased by her demons, leaving only a will-o'-the-wisp glow behind. I followed desperately, my heart racing, adrenaline pumping, calling her name until my voice was hoarse, until I was knee-deep in mud and weeds, but the moon hung heavy and mocking above, and just as I thought I'd lost her forever, I found her in a clearing where the air crackled with a demonic energy, where shadows twisted into shapes of creatures I couldn't comprehend, all gathered like spectators, and Clara knelt on the forest floor, eyes wide, empty, and in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just losing Clara, she was transforming, surrounded by the darkness that had clawed and grown for her for so long. It was surreal, watching the love of my life become something else entirely, a halo of bitter light surrounding her, begging me to save her, but all I did was stand frozen, a frightful witness to the horror unfolding before me as she succumbed to the power drawing her, and when the echoes of her laughter turned into wails of anguish, I knew my heart was tearing apart. I reached for her, desperate to pull her back, but she was already slipping away, swallowed by a haze of shadows that drank from her essence, and with each cry, each shard of my soul ripped away, a voice resonated deep within me, whispering that this was it, this was the price of love bound in darkness. When the glowing ceased, the forest was silent, and all that remained was a chilling sense of emptiness. But even as I stumbled back home, paralyzed by grief, I never had a moment's doubt that she was still alive. I was certain she was somewhere, still fighting, still struggling against the chains forged from her very blood. As years turned into decades, I found myself captivated by the menacing specter of the past, replaying that night in my mind like a broken record, and though my heart became a twisted caricature of love, each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, I returned to the clearing, expecting to feel her presence, hoping for a sign, breathing in the air thick with desperation. I decorated the spot with wildflowers, lighting candles and whispering her name like a prayer, convinced the darkness that took her could somehow return her to me, but all I got in return were the echoes and memory, the stale warmth of memories tainted by her absence until one fateful night, after what felt like an eternity of longing, I was jolted from my reverie. It was late, and the fog rolled into the clearing thick and heavy, transforming the place into a damp, otherworldly realm, and as I set the candles ablaze, a chill seized me, the air quivering with a familiar heartbeat as if it knew I was there, and for a moment I was overwhelmed by the scent of her perfume, a reminder of nights wrapped in her embrace. Elation and dread battled within me as shadows danced at the edge of the clearing, and then there she was, ethereal and luminous, Clara, emerging from the mist, but she was not the girl I remembered. Her smile was absent, her eyes lacked the warmth, and the shadowy energy flickered around her like flames, mesmerizing yet terrifying. "You were supposed to forget," she whispered, her voice like fragile glass, cutting through me, and every word was a stab in the heart as I felt the truth. I was not seeing the love of my life, I was gazing at a hollow stranger draped in her form, a futile figment of all that had vanished, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. My love had become a cruel reflection, and I reached for her, aching to pull her close, but as my fingers grazed her skin, a jolt surged through me, a searing touch that felt alien, and it struck me how much she had changed, how she was intertwined with the darkness now. "You shouldn't have come back," she breathed, and I could hear the sorrow in her voice woven with menace. But I didn't care. I loved her still, I would always love her. I never stopped, I managed to say, hope spilling from my lips, but before I could take another breath, the shadows surrounding her reached out like icy tendrils, wrapping themselves around my wrist as she took a step back, and I felt the ground beneath me shift. She was backing away into the depths of that darkness that had always claimed her, the gulf widening, and the air grew thick with despair until it felt almost solid. "I can't go back," she cried, and in that moment, I saw the real Clara glimmering through the cracks of that darkened shell. "You have to let me go," she urged, but the desperation clawed at my throat, each heartbeat louder and more frantic. "No. I can't. I won't," I shouted, the words spilling out of me like blood from an open wound, but she was already sliding further away, as if the shadows were pulling her back like tendrils from another world, and I realized, too late, that I couldn't save her. In that fraught moment, I learned love wasn't enough to conjure her back to life, nor would it ever be. Then, the shadows erupted, transforming into a storm of darkness, swallowing her entirely, and I was left standing alone in the clearing, breathless, trembling, crying out in anguish as the echoes finally fell to silence. The candles flickered one last time before snuffing out, and as I sunk to my knees, I finally understood. It had been 20 years of hell, missing her, yearning for her, but now the realization seeped into my bones that it was too late. Clara was gone forever, consumed by the darkness she had battled, while I was left with the heavy burden of this twisted, lingering love that would never release its grip, binding me endlessly to the pain of her absence, forcing me to survive in a world that felt dreadfully bleak without her light. Ever since I stumbled upon that old, worn-out mattress in the alley behind my apartment complex, my life took a turn I never anticipated. It was filthy and covered in mystery stains, but the moment I laid down, something shifted within me and gave me this transcendent sense of comfort I'd been chasing my whole life. It was like the weight of the world evaporated, and each night thereafter I felt an irresistible pull to surrender myself to that hard, cold floor rather than crawl into my perfectly good bed, and at first, I tried to fight it, told myself that I was being ridiculous, but the compelling urge only grew stronger, a siren's call, whispering promises of rest and escape I couldn't resist. Each night curled into the embrace of the floor sent ripples of euphoria through me. That mattress had opened up a door to a level of dreams that felt so real, so rich, that I wished I could stay within those vivid landscapes forever. I began to dream vividly. I could fly over cities I'd never seen, dive deep into the ocean and swim with translucent creatures, feel the warmth of a sun that didn't scorch, only caressed, and often, oddly enough, I found another presence beside me in those dreams, someone with a familiar touch but a face I struggled to see clearly, though I could feel their warmth radiating, grounding me, as if I belonged to them. And in the mornings, waking up on that hard floor left me feeling invigorated, as if the air itself buzzed with life and possibility. Sometimes I would forget to grab my coffee. Instead, I bask in the fluttering joy that filled my chest, convinced that I had found my new mantra in life. Why bother with the comforts of a bed filled with sheets and pillows when this rough existence brought such elation? My body grew accustomed to the uneven ground and the ache seemed trivial compared to the wonders I visited each night. Friends started to express concern when they saw the state of me, dark circles forming, a wild look in my eyes, but I brushed them off, murmuring about how freeing it was to sleep low and close to the earth, nonchalantly downplaying the magic that enveloped me every time I sank into slumber. As days turned to weeks, I lost track of time. I didn't mind missing out on gatherings or late-night bar hops, and soon I noticed the odd synchronicities in my dreams, faces from my past, strangers who felt familiar, encounters that felt eerily prophetic. I'd wake, drenched in a cold sweat, mind racing with newfound fears. A recurring shadow began to follow me down the corridors of my dreams, an ever-tightening noose that suggested it wanted something, and while part of me shuddered, the other part delighted in the thrill of it all. The line between normalcy and the enchanted began to blur, and I still wouldn't quit sleeping on the floor, soaked in anticipation for what lay on the other side of sleep. I document my dreams fervently, each night crafting a map of my experiences, a journal that looked more and more like scattered attempts at legacy building rather than simple reminiscences. I could tell the shadow wanted me. It was dark and often shapeless, always lurking at the edges of my consciousness, forcing whispers into my ears, but they wouldn't translate into cohesive words, only muffled interactions that lured me further into a complexity I couldn't disentangle myself from. My mornings darkened then, turning sharp and jagged, the pleasure of a day starting anew replaced with dread, yet I clung to the floor like it was an anchor, keeping me tethered to the unknown. One day I woke up late, the sun casting long shadows, and as I had not left my floor in a while, my stomach growled with hunger while I stretched stiffly on the ground, and that was when I saw it, a letter, yellowed and crumpled, left lying near my head. It bore no address or signature, just a chilling phrase that read, "You didn't remember, did you?" A jolt of panic coursed through me, my heart racing as I scanned the room for signs of someone else's presence. I crumpled the letter with trembling fingers and forced myself to breathe, but it only ignited my obsession to return to the dreamscape, as if the needs of my subconscious were crying out for clarification. As that night took over, I surrendered once more to the pull of the floor, the allure of the dreams far too seductive to resist, and when I finally descended into sleep, twisted emotions battled within me, visions both beautiful and terrifying swirling together until they crystallized into the most vivid dream of all. I was standing before a mirror in an echoing hall surrounded by mutilated reflections of myself, voices screaming in dissonance behind me, as the shadow loomed larger, stretching its limbs to grasp me, and suddenly I understood, it was not a shapeless what, but a who, a reflection of myself I had abandoned in my relentless pursuit of bliss on the floor. It began whispering my name, promising the power of forgetting all the pain and hurt, and just as I thought I could lose myself in its siren call forever, I saw my tranquil self, the one who lay on the floor and sought solace, suffer, writhing as it faded like smoke in mirrors to give way to the truth that still lingered in my waking hours. That this was not a new existence but a prison, dragging my weary soul ever deeper, forcing me to face the terror of isolation that flickered like a dying flame. And then I woke up again on the hardwood floor as the morning light poured in, feeling the crushing weight of hopeless emptiness thrumming in the air around me. I had hoped to reject it, but I could never stop sleeping on the floor. It's bloody amazing, a seductive dream that might end up swallowing me whole. This weekend, I'm having an abortion and I can't shake this feeling of dread that claws at my insides like a feral animal. I'm terrified, but not because of the procedure itself. No, it's the echoes of my choices reverberating through my mind that awaken the ghosts of my past. I'm already a mother, and the weight of that title can feel like an anchor dragging me down into a murky sea of desperation. The image of my daughter sleeping peacefully in her room, oblivious to the turmoil of emotions roiling within me, haunts me. I chose to keep her when I was 18, fresh out of high school and bursting with dreams, only to find out that motherhood for me is more of a prison than a sanctuary. Each year has felt more like a countdown than a gift, the joy of her little milestones eclipsed by the crushing responsibilities that suffocate my spirit. My friends tell me I'm a good mom, but what they don't see is the way guilt gnaws at my insides, the way I can't shake off the feeling that I'm failing my daughter by merely existing as a shell of the woman I used to be. 3 weeks ago, the panic set in when I found out I was pregnant again. I remember the sharp gasp I took as the test turned from 2 lines to a burning reminder of my reality, my heart racing as if I could outrun the consequences. I keep replaying the moments that led me here, the temporary lapse in sanity that resulted in a life I didn't want. It was sloppy, reckless, and I knew deep down I needed to end it before the weights of another child anchored me even further into this despair. But even as I finalize the decision, an unsettling voice whispers in the corners of my mind, asking if I'm solely doing this for myself, which makes the guilt swirl more violently, especially when I picture my daughter's bright eyes lighting up at the idea of being a big sister. Rational thoughts twist grotesquely, becoming monstrous shapes that loom over me. A constant reminder that some women would kill for the chance to cradle another life. My heart races as I scroll through an abortive forum, the raw narratives of those taking the same plunge. I only find snippets of solace in comment threads, women sharing stories of fear, heartbreak, and liberation intertwined like a chaotic tapestry. But it doesn't ease the pang of loss. I feel like I'm stepping closer to a precipice with every passing day, and the edge beckons me with its dark allure. I spend the days leading up to the appointment trapped in my own head, oscillating between anxiety and resolve. I can hardly focus on anything at all, lunches, laundry, school pickups, and for the first time, I find myself wishing the hours away, as though I can fast forward to an uncertain future because at least it signifies an end to this unbearable limbo. My mother's voice echoes whenever I dare to think about discussing my choice with her. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. Her judgment hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the memories of how she always seemed disappointed in my choices. So how could I possibly tell her this? It sends shudders down my spine, bringing the tight knot of fear back to my throat. The night before the procedure, I lay in bed, staring into the dark. It swirls with unfamiliar shapes and shadows that seem to mock me, whispering, "You are going to regret this." I check the time again, 3:02 a.m. I can't help but think about the what-ifs. What if I go through with it and regret it later? What if I somehow lose this child and never forgive myself? It's an agonizing loop that steals my sleep, and somehow, as I watch the dawn creep in through my window, I start to wish I had never seen that pregnancy test in the first place. I think perhaps it's the fact that I can feel the weight of other women's suffering echoing through me, and it's horrifying. The hours crawl, each tick of the clock feeling like a drumbeat in my chest, signaling my impending choice. The morning of the procedure blurs as I dress and collect my thoughts. However, just before my appointment, I receive a message from a friend, congratulatory and innocent. She doesn't know yet. "Hey! You should tell your daughter she's going to be a big sis." My heart lurches painfully at the thought. I want to scream and cry, to push away the looming fate that's just ahead, yet it only solidifies the fear that has grown thick and suffocating deep within me. When I finally arrive at the clinic, the fluorescent lights buzz overhead, blinding and sterile, and the waiting room is filled with a mix of tension, sadness, and an unsettling camaraderie, as if we're all private members of a club of despair, each woman clutching her heartache beneath the surface. I sit there, feeling disassociated as I stare at the posters on the wall promoting women's health. They seem so jovial, speaking of choice and empowerment, yet here I am, crushed beneath the weight of my own choices. When they finally call my name, I feel a wave of nausea wash over me, intertwined with a sense of inevitability, and as I move toward the narrow hallway, I can't help but wish more than anything for this opportunity to vanish and for me to be free of my own decisions. The doctor is kind but detached. She speaks in soothing tones that feel oddly clinical, and I keep reminding myself of the reasons I'm there, the relief I'll feel afterward. But amidst it all, in the sharp tang of antiseptic, my memories come alive, the sweet laugh of my daughter, the feel of her small hand gripping mine, the way she looks at me as if I am her entire world, and a sudden wave of panic hits me. What if this is my last chance? As the procedure begins and the world falls silent around me, I feel the terror building within. It's as though I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into an abyss where every failed option and unmade choice lie festering like wounds. And as I close my eyes, tears streaming down my cheeks, I try to remember why I'm here and breathe deeply into the fear, hoping that somewhere within this harrowing moment, amidst the chaos of the choices I've wrestled with, I can unearth the strength that has eluded me for so long before I plunge headlong into the darkness. I have to tell you something that happened today. Something I never thought would turn my entire life upside down in the span of just a few minutes, and believe me when I say it's going to sound insane, but I assure you it's true. Just 10 minutes ago, my dad found my pocket PC. Yeah, you heard that right, and let me explain before you judge, it's not what you think. I bought it a couple of weeks ago when I was feeling particularly lonely and curious about the whole thing, and I kept it hidden under a stack of old clothes in my closet, a place I thought was secure. Anyway, my dad, bless his heart, decided it was time to clean out the storage space in my room this morning. He's always been super practical, and he thinks that a clutter-free room equals a clutter-free mind. I was in the living room pretending to study because if I tried to stop him, I knew I'd have to admit I wasn't even working and that would mean more chores. So there I was, sweating bullets as I heard the telltale rustle of clothes being shifted around and then the unmistakable sound of plastic crinkling. That's when my heart started racing. It was only a matter of time before reality crashed down on me like an avalanche. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to remind him that sometimes it's better not to know. He wouldn't understand, or worse, he would judge me. But I just kept my mouth shut, too tortured by the anticipation. And then I heard it, the solid, resounding thump of the plastic hitting the floor. My stomach dropped, and I swear I could feel my heart pounding in my throat as the thought of him discovering it turned into a nightmare. I focused on the sound of the TV instead, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he'd dismiss it, thinking it was some weird toy or something left behind from when I was younger. But then, his footsteps started moving towards me, and my brain went into overdrive. Should I run? Should I pretend to be asleep? All I could think about was how he once told me that fathers should be a source of guidance and strength, not shame, but I felt so vulnerable at that moment. "Hey, come here for a second," he called out, his voice completely calm, and that only made my anxiety spike higher, wondering how on earth he could be so nonchalant about discovering his son's secret pleasure. I took a deep breath and stepped toward him, feeling like I was walking to my execution instead of just to the living room, and there he was, holding it in his massive hands like it was the strangest relic he'd ever found. "What's this?" he asked, and I could see it lying in the middle of the floor, glistening unnaturally yellow in the light, a horrifyingly intimate object that felt like a betrayal not just of my own privacy but of everything we'd ever shared. He didn't look angry, just bewildered, and I could only muster a weak, it's a toy. The embarrassment clawed at my throat, tightening like a noose as I tried to justify something that felt inherently unjustifiable. In that fleeting moment, all the thoughts of potential explanations ran through my mind. What would it even mean for him to know this side of me? But instead of outrage or disappointment, there was just this moment of awkward silence, a chasm opening between who I was, who I wanted to be, and who I knew he saw me as. "A toy for what?" he asked, eyes narrowing, not in judgment but in genuine confusion, and I swallowed hard, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes as my body reacted to both shame and fear in their most primal forms. I was hyper-aware of everything around us, the old family photos watching silently from the wall, the clock ticking away the precious seconds, and the very air growing thick with unspilled feelings. You know, when you're alone. I blurted out, my heart racing as the words escaped my lips, and I watched as his mouth fell open slightly in shock, and then something shifted in his gaze, not anger or judgment, but a kind of understanding, perhaps even empathy. "You know, son," he said slowly, almost hesitantly, "everyone has their ways of coping. I wasn't always this old and wise." It felt like the ground shifted beneath my feet, some kind of twisted normalization of the situation as he recounted awkward tales from his own youth, stumbling through the clumsiness of his teenage years in a way that reflected a shared humanity between us. It was still so surreal for me, the notion that he could ever relate to my experience in that way, but it also left me feeling exposed, like the last vestiges of my privacy had been stripped away. "Just next time, keep it hidden better," he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips as I somehow felt a sense of belonging resurfacing despite the very awkwardness of the moment. It was bizarre, shooting back into my brain like a jolt of disbelief that this conversation could even be happening. But then, as the words hung between us and the initial shock wore off, I sensed an undeniable echo in the silence that loomed afterward, as though despite the understanding, a shadow had crept in, reminding me that not everything can be normalized. There's a fine line between acceptance and envision, and I couldn't shake the thought that something unspoken loomed overhead now, like a dark cloud. What else about me might he find if he kept digging? What else had I left behind in the nooks and crannies of my life that could compel him to look deeper? And just like that, my mind spiraled into the terrain of paranoia, nurturing the seeds of worry that despite the light-hearted banner, I could never completely escape the judgment, or worse, the betrayal lurking just beneath the surface of his calm demeanor. 10 minutes had changed everything, torn apart the fabric of a simple father-son relationship and opened up a chasm of uncertainty. And just when I thought that maybe we could laugh this off and go back to the usual domestic grind, I realized I didn't even know how to face him now, how to reconcile the intimacy of that moment with my own vulnerability, and as I turned to escape the heavy burden of the room, I was left with an echo of something deeper, an unsettling reminder that no matter how light he intended to make it, I'd never look at that pocket PC the same way again, or my dad, or any part of my life that, for the first time, seemed irrevocably intertwined with secrets I could never shake off, leaving me to wonder how many more hidden things lay dormant in my existence, waiting to be brought into the light, as everything I thought I knew began to unravel, one uncomfortable revelation at a time. For weeks, I had watched Greg, our flashy co-worker, slip into the dimly lit bathroom beneath the fluorescent buzz of the office lights, only to emerge moments later, his demeanor disheveled, and his eyes glazed over, a shadow of their former self. It started when I overheard him mumbling to himself during a meeting, and while I brushed it off at first, the unsettling scent of stale cigarettes and something sweetly sickly wafting through the air during our lunch breaks couldn't be ignored, and with each passing day, my concern morphed into a gnawing suspicion that he was drowning his anxiety in more than just caffeine, leading me to one fateful day when the stress of deadlines and uncomfortable interactions coalesced into a moment of reckless courage, pushing me to scribble a note that ominously read, "I saw Greg snorting Xanax in the bathroom and leaving it on my boss's computer," the thrill of uncertainty mingling with guilt as I left the office for the day, convinced that I was doing the right thing, protecting my colleagues and preserving the office's integrity. The following morning, I returned to a charged atmosphere, whispers electrifying the air, and the uneasy tension in the break room made me feel as if everyone's eyes were drawn to me, yet paradoxically, none of them seemed to notice the absence of Greg, who was unceremoniously terminated last night, or so I was told. The details were murky at best, but it became painfully evident that the note had reached the right hands and precipitated a swift downfall, his pathetic excuse for an explanation lost between hushed giggles and nervous glances among my co-workers, their laughter sharp enough to cut through my anxiety, and still I couldn't shake the feeling that I had triggered something much darker than I intended. As I replayed my decision over and over in my mind like a haunting melody, what if Greg wasn't just snorting Xanax? What if it was worse? The tremors of guilt gnawed at my insides, turning the office into a stage set for a terrible crime, and that sense was only deepened when I witnessed Lisa, his closest confidant, her face pale, almost as if the very essence of joy had leaked out of her during the chaos, approached me in the copy room, her eyes wide with sleepless fright. She lowered her voice, the tremor in her hands shaking the paper she clutched, a half-written apology to Greg scrawled in a hurried script. "You shouldn't have done this," she whispered, leaving me cold, my own heartbeat thundering in my ears as I questioned her allegiance and intentions, each word wrapping itself around my mind like a noose. Days turned into nights, and while the office buzz continued, Greg's absence grew heavier, thicker, like a fog strangling the very air, and at noon, I noticed Lisa arguing with our boss in hushed, frantic whispers, pointing fingers with expressions that mirrored horror more than anger, but it was her expression that struck a chord in my gut, the real fear radiating off of her like heat from a fire. Something elsewhere in our building had gone off course, and even though pieces of the puzzle scattered across my mind didn't seem to form a picture, they would remain there, spiraling into dark thoughts until the day I got home and found a mangled note slipped through my door saying, "You have no idea what you've done," scrawled in Greg's handwriting. My heart fell, terror and regret intertwined like roots from a twisted, ancient tree, and as night fell and sleep evaded me, I stared at the ceiling wondering who else had known, who else had seen Mark's deepening darkness in the bathroom. The whispers to each other now morphing into something sinister, paranoia locking doors inside my mind, then driving out to find comfort in any possible way. I found myself reaching out to a friend, only to realize the stakes were far too high, the entanglement of betrayal and ignorance stretched infinitely, every phone call seemed compromised, every interaction tinged with a silent undertow of danger, and reality itself began to feel skewed, a mirage flickering at the corners of my vision. Before you know it, I was awake every night, the insidious thoughts taking root, convinced that Greg was watching me, a specter haunting my cubicle, lying in wait for the perfect opportunity to strike back, twisting the narrative so skillfully that even I doubted my own intentions, once so solid, now drowned in uncertainty. And then, one fateful evening, as I departed late from the office in a haze of fatigue, I felt the prickle of eyes on my back, a familiar shiver that sent shudders through my body, making my dinner lurch, only to find Greg standing in the shadows between cars, a smirk twisting his lips, hidden beneath the fluorescent glow of the streetlights, his presence slithering into my nightmares. "You think you can ruin me?" he whispered, stepping into the light just enough for me to see the depthless darkness behind his eyes, and it was in that moment, dear reader, that I felt the cold hand of regret wrap around my throat, because I had thought I had done something good when, in reality, I had unleashed a storm I would never survive. And now, all I can say is that if you ever feel compelled to right a wrong, just remember, the consequences might not just come for you, but for everyone you love, and sometimes the monsters you create are far worse than the ones you thought you were saving others from. I never thought asking women for their IDs would lead to something sinister, but here I am, sharing a tale that forever changed how I see the world around me. My name is Luke, and I'm a 29-year-old bartender at a trendy downtown bar, surrounded by neon lights and the hum of laughter. The job has its perks. I get to meet all kinds of people, most of them well above the legal drinking age of 21. You'd think it'd be simple, like just pouring drinks and taking some shots with the customers, but there's a game I play that keeps my mind entertained and, I suppose, a bit morbid. It started on a dare with some friends one night as we countered the boredom of the slow hours. They challenged me to ask attractive women for their IDs, even those who clearly looked older than me. I began doing it casually, laughing it off when they'd roll their eyes or smirk. "Do I look like a minor?" But one night, everything changed when she walked in. Her name was Sarah, a stunning brunette who seemed to float rather than walk, with a smile that could charm the devil. As she approached the bar and ordered her drink, my fingers tingled with the thrill of the chase. I smiled and asked her for her ID, half knowing she might think it was some sort of flirty banter. Instead, she cocked her head, her eyes narrowing with intrigue. Then she produced her wallet and slid me her driver's license. To my surprise, she was 28, but it wasn't the number that caught my attention, it was the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she handed it over. I caught a glimpse of something strange. Her picture showed a woman with vibrant energy, but her aura felt clouded, heavy, as if she were carrying a darkness that didn't quite belong to her. I chuckled lightheartedly, returning her ID, but something compelled me to ask her if I could see it again. if only to admire the weird sensation swirling around her. She handed it back, a little bemused, but the entire vibe shifted then and there. Seconds felt like hours as I scanned her ID, delighting in studying the small details and avoiding the pulsating flicker of the overhead lights that reminded me of the cover of a horror movie. Before I could catch myself, I muttered softly, "You don't seem like someone I'd want to check," my voice barely above a whisper, as if calling forth a spell with the words. A sudden chill crawled up my spine when she leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear as she murmured, "Well, maybe I'm not," sending ripples of unease racing down my body. Overwhelmed by a cocktail of emotions, I found it difficult to compartmentalize the attraction and the sudden feeling of foreboding that crackled in the air. Sarah returned to her group of friends, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, an inkling I desperately wanted to ignore. Later that night, she and her friends remained at the bar, laughter mingling with drinks until the moon hung high and the crowd began to thin. But Sarah didn't leave. Instead, she pulled me aside as if to share a secret. I believed for a moment I had misread the signs, but what she showed me was a strange beauty in her cracked voice, the haunting notion that she was not just a woman harboring darkness but an emissary of it. "You think this is all a joke, don't you? Asking for IDs?" she said, her tone turning serious. "But what if I told you that sometimes they're not what they seem?" I chuckled nervously, because deep down, I could feel anxiety swell. "You're kidding, right?" But she wasn't laughing, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. Suddenly, she produced an old, battered ID from her jacket pocket, and it sent my blood cold. It displayed her name, Sarah, but it also had a date of birth that would have placed her in her mid-50s. I'm telling you, Luke. IDs and age are just illusions. The truth is far darker than these games you think you play. I felt my breath hitch, the weight of her words crashing down like an impending storm. My mind scrambled for rationality while my instinct screamed at me to run. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, the bar entrance swung open, revealing an inexplicably tall figure cloaked in shadows, a silhouette that made my skin crawl. Everyone turned, but Sarah's gaze never glanced away from mine, her lips curling into an unsettling grin that possessed the clarity of a predator eyeing her prey. "Playtime is over," she whispered, and even though I didn't understand what she meant, something inside of me clenched, knowing I'd crossed a line into territory I should have never approached. I backed away instinctively, but the figure was right behind me now, its presence looming dark and uncanny, and before I could register a sound, Sarah vanished. The atmosphere shifted violently, laughter fading into a suffocating silence, confusion tore through the space, yet I couldn't shake the icy grip of dread that seized my heart. I glanced around, pinpointing the figure, but each time I laid eyes on it, it would seem to slip away further into the void, merging with the dark corners of the bar. Panic burst through me, and I hurriedly made my way to the exit, trying to shake off what felt like an intense fever dream. But as I crossed the threshold, I could hear that same distant, lilting laughter echo behind me, and it chilled me to the marrow. Because in her laughter, I sensed something primal, something hauntingly alive that shouldn't have existed in this realm. The drive home paralyzed me with unease, and when I stepped inside my apartment, shadows seemed to slither along the walls, following me to where I collapsed into bed, muscles trembling. Sleep eluded me, but that laugh, combined with the weight of Sarah's warning, loomed large, gnawing at my sanity until I finally began to drift into a fitful slumber. Hours passed, each tick of the clock amplifying my growing paranoia, and suddenly, the shrill sound of my phone jolted me awake, a simple text notification, cracking the veil of my nightmares. I opened my messages, only to find a single picture sent with no explanation, a shadowy figure standing in front of a bar, illuminated only by the faint glow of neon lights. My heart raced as recognition gripped me. It was the same place I worked, the same shadows that clung to me, but what made it worse was the detail that made my stomach drop. The figure was a familiar silhouette, and in her fingertips, she held an old ID that looked hauntingly similar to the one I'd glimpsed earlier that night. "I'm always watching you, Luke." A reminder, a warning, or perhaps an invitation? With trembling hands, I deleted the message, trying to quell the surge of dread clawing at my chest, but deep down, I knew that this wasn't over. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, a persistent reminder of extremes teetering between allure and menace, all centered around a simple game that I thought was nothing more than a harmless joke. But now I understood that some games invite dark forces, and those forces don't play by our rules. In the days that followed, my shifts at the bar became torturous. Every time a woman approached the counter, I held my breath, the thrill of asking for an ID shifting into a dark fixation. I could feel the air grow heavier, the laughter of the patrons blurring into an ominous hum. The world grew sharp and distorted, and each glance at a woman felt like an invitation to navigate through a web of secrets. Days morphed into a confusing haze, hands trembling as I poured drinks, wondering when my next encounter might yield a familiar figure. It was only a week later, after I'd convinced myself I was imagining things, that I saw her again. Sarah stood at the bar's entrance, no longer the enchantress from the week prior but rather a specter of my own torment. She wore a different outfit, but the same bemused smirk carved at the edges of her mouth. My heart raced, dread coiling tightly as if it prepared me for confrontation. The moment our eyes locked, I stepped back involuntarily, half expecting the dark figure to materialize behind her. "You thought you could just forget about me?" she asked, her voice dripping with honey and menace all at once, the melody haunting yet beautifully dissonant. "Isn't that right? You like games, Luke." Palms slick with sweat, I shook my head in disbelief, fear coursing through me, compelling me to act, to scream, to run. But Sarah continued. "You asked for an ID, and I showed you mine. Did you like what you saw?" I swallowed hard, compressing down the rising panic that threatened to explode, and those casual bar patrons became blurred figures, mere background noise to the tremors of anxiety coursing through me. An inexplicable force drew me closer. I compelled myself to lean closer as well, desperate to understand the enigma in front of me. "What are you?" The question slipped from my lips before I could filter my thoughts, and I knew that crossing this line would change everything. A chilling smile crept across her face. "I'm exactly what you should have never invited in, Luke. And now, we're intertwined in this game." As her words echoed, the ambient noise of the bar faded, replaced by an overwhelming sensation of vertigo. Panic ensued when I felt hands gripping my arms, the shadows inching toward me, weaving through my vision like starlings tangled in thorns. I blinked, and suddenly it was as if I was in a dream. Objects around me grotesquely stretched, and people blurred into fog, every detail twisting apart until Sarah was the only clarity left. "Don't you get it?" she breathed, eyes glimmering with an unearthly spark. "It's a cycle, Luke. Each encounter ebbs and flows with the energy you bring into it. Here's your chance to play." She reached forward, placing my trembling hand over her own, and I felt a tremor surge through me, something alive crawling beneath the surface of her skin. My heart hammered in my chest, and before I could jerk my hand away, it sunk deeper into her flesh, the warmth fading like the flicker of a candle before extinguishing into a dark void. "Join me," she whispered, and suddenly I was drawn, not just as a spectator to her world lurking behind the veil of normality, but engulfed by the shadow she embodied. It swallowed me whole, muscle and sinew stretching between the tapestry of existence until all I could feel was the desire to unearth those secrets. But even as I'd embraced this darkness, I knew there would be a price to pay, and today, it was already too late to turn back. And now, dear reader, I raise my glass in remembrance of what was once an innocent game. All it took was that simple question to unravel the fabric of reality, and now I am curled up in my own skin, haunted forever in the dance of shadows, always watching, always wondering who will ask for an ID next. I've been smoking crack on and off for a few weeks now, and while I know it's messed up, I can't shake this feeling that it's not just the drug altering my perception, something darker is slipping into my reality. It all started innocently enough, you know? Just a way to escape the relentless grind of a dead-end job and a failed relationship that I had been stewing in for too long. At first, it was a little hit here and there, a way to temporarily float above the suffocating weight of my existence, but then, as these things often go, I started to crave it more. I didn't think it could get worse than when I lost my job. I had that oh-so-familiar rock-bottom moment where you stare into the abyss and tell yourself it's just a phase. But one night, on a whim, I invited this guy named Kevin, a friend of a friend, over. I'd heard he could get good stuff, and at that time, I was dying for an escape. As the smoke curled and danced around us, I felt my skin tingle, the walls melting away like an ice cube in the summer heat. For a few hours, everything was euphoric. Days turned into nights. My sense of time became a mere suggestion, and before I knew it, I was lost in a haze of endless high that spun deeper and deeper into a chasm of paranoia and dread. Waking up became increasingly harder. I look in the mirror and barely recognize the ghost staring back, shadows under my eyes telling me I hadn't seen sunlight in days. I started hearing whispers, little things really, like the TV playing even when it was off or the faint sound of laughter echoing in my empty apartment. It was easy to brush it off at first, after all. My mind was running on fumes, dancing dangerously close to madness, but then one night, everything changed. I just hit that peak, and as I floated into my high, the whispers became clear, forming words that made my heart race. "Help us," they said, chillingly coherent. I blinked hard, questioning my sanity. Surely this couldn't be happening. I looked around the room, expecting Kevin to jump out and laugh at the prank, but he was gone, as usual, having slipped into the shadows like a specter. Shaking it off, I tried diving deeper into the haze, but the voices persisted. Fractured syllables of "find us" echoed ceaselessly in my mind, relentless as the high faded, and I could no longer disregard it as mere hallucination. The next day, I found myself in a stupor, replaying those words, and I couldn't help but entertain the idea that perhaps something or someone needed me, needed help. After the ecstatic high wore off, the sobering weight of reality loomed over me like a thunderous cloud. It had been nearly a week since I last saw anyone, so I reached out to Kevin. What I got instead was a number unfamiliar, a soft-spoken voice that sent shivers down my spine as it asked, "Are you ready to hear our story?" The drumming in my chest quickened. I wanted to hang up, I wanted to say no, but I couldn't utter a sound. The voice continued, "You've unlocked the door that has been shut for so long, but you may not like what you find." I thought about it, envisioning the void I was existing in, and spoke through trembling lips, "What do you mean?" There was a pause, an eerie stillness, then a soft chuckle, and just like that, he repeated, "You've been smoking crack on and off for a few weeks, do you really understand the price of that?" I thought back, everything began swirling in gears. "What price?" I demanded, panic rising. And then I heard it, an unmistakable melody creeping from my kitchen, a teasing lull that seemed to beckon, harmonizing beautifully with the whispering voices. "Find us," it sang sweetly, luring me from the depths of my despair. I stumbled towards the sound, convinced I was losing my grip on reality, but I had to know. Curiosity clawed deeper than any drug ever could. Gripping the doorknob, I turned it, feeling every drop of sweat drip down my back, and I found my kitchen glowing, as though lit by thousands of fireflies. There in the corner, shadows twisted into shapes, children dancing, laughing, their expressions blissfully innocent yet tinged with something sinister. And their voices overlapped, blending into one chilling hum, "Help us! Help us!" I tried to scream, but the high had carved my throat into stone, and then I understood, they didn't just need help, they wanted me to join them. The whispers, the children, they were lost souls, addicts trapped in some vengeful purgatory, and here I was, the unwitting key to their freedom. "You're just like us," the soft voice from the phone continued, "just another lost soul in this never-ending cycle." I stepped back, every instinct screaming to flee, yet their smiles captivated me, drawing me into a spiral of horror I could hardly fathom. I turned to run, desperate to escape this waking nightmare, but something strange happened. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the kitchen door slammed shut, locking me inside. The children became frantic, their laughter twisting into wails, and suddenly I was bombarded by visions of their stories, a torrent of anguished memories flooding my mind, tragic endings, lives lost in addiction, moments of weakness that condemned them to replaying this macabre dance. I was no longer in control, their pain, their joy, their despair washed over me like a tide, pulling me down into depths I never imagined. I thrashed against the door, pounding my fists until they bled, but the voices grew louder, drowning out my screams with their collective sorrow. "Join us! Join us!" they cried, and as desperation set in, the truth gnawed at me. The drug had opened my mind to a reality I never wanted, and in my search for escape, I had just stepped into the haunting embrace of the very darkness I thought I could outrun. In that moment, I was no different from them, lost, trapped, pleading for something I could no longer understand. As my vision blurred and the laughter crescendoed into a final, deafening roar, everything blackened, and I realized the whispers were right. I had been smoking crack on and off for a few weeks, but now the crack had smoked me,